This Dharma talk was offered by Robert Beatty, the guiding teacher of PIMC, the Portland, Oregon Insight Meditation Community.
Death asked me to join him for dinner, and so I slipped into my favorite black dress that I'd been saving for a special occasion. And I let him walk me to our candlelit tryst. He ordered a ribeye extra rare. I ordered 2 desserts and red wine. And then I sipped and wondered why he looked so familiar and smelled like earth and memory. He felt like a place both far away and deep within my body. A place that whispers to me on the crisp autumn breeze, along the liminal edges of dusk and dawn, somewhere between dancing and stillness. He looked at me with the endless night sky in his eyes and asked, "Did you live your life, my love?" As I swirled my wine in its glass. I wondered if I had understood the thread I wove into the greater fabric, if I loved in a way that was deep and freeing, if I let pain and grief carve me into something more grateful, if I made enough space to be in awe that flowers exist and take the time to watch the honeybees drink their sweet nectar. I wondered what the riddles of regret and longing had taught me, and if I realized just how beautiful and insignificant and monstrous and small we all are. For the brief moment that we are here, before we all melt back down into the ancestors of the land. Death watched me lick buttercream from my fingers as he leaned in close and said, "My darling, it's time." So I slipped my hand into his as he slowly walked me home. I took a deep breath as he leaned in close for the long kiss goodnight. And I felt a soft laugh leave my lips as his mouth met mine, because I never could resist a man with the lust for my soul in his eyes, and a kiss that makes my heart stop. Death asked me to join him for dinner, so I slipped into my favorite black dress that I'd been saving for a special occasion, and I let him walk me to our candlelit tryst. He ordered a ribeye extra rare. I ordered 2 desserts and red wine, and then I sipped and wondered why he looked so familiar and smelled like earth and memory. He felt like a place both far away and deep within my body, a place that whispers to me on the crisp autumn breeze, along the liminal edges of dusk and dawn. Somewhere between dancing and stillness, he looked at me with the endless night sky in his eyes and asked, "Did you live your life, my love?" As I swirled my wine in his glass, I wondered if I understood the thread I wove into the greater fabric, if I loved in a way that was deep and freeing, if I let pain and grief carve me into something more grateful, if I made enough space to be in awe that flowers exist, and take the time to watch the honeybees drink their sweet nectar. I wondered what the riddles of regret and longing had taught me, and if I realized just how beautiful and insignificant and monstrous and small we are. For the brief moment that we are here before we all melt back down into ancestors of the land. Death watched me lick buttercream from my fingers as he leaned in close and said, "My darling, it's time." So I slipped my hand into his as he slowly walked me home. I took a deep breath as he leaned in close for the long kiss goodnight. And I felt a soft laugh leave my lips as his mouth met mine, because I could never resist a man with the lust for my soul in his eyes, and a kiss that makes my heart stop. Thank you for letting me play this role. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Goenka. and all the dozens of people who've helped me. Anita Witt, my parents, Mrs. McLagan, my 5th grade teacher, she saved me. I'd been in the Catholic schools, and my father sold smut. He sold Playboy and Batman. The company he ran distributed it to the city. The Catholic Women's League found out about this and they tried to get my mother excommunicated. And my sister was the senior Girl Scout Girl Guide in Eastern Canada. And on Easter morning, she was asked to carry the flag in front of the big parade of the priests and everybody. And the head of the Catholic Women's League came out and took the flag out of her leather pouch and said, "Your father sells smut." And the Christian brothers, who were my teachers, found every excuse they could, like I got snow on my back or something, and I'd have to go in and then they would give me the strap. Bye-bye. So I'm going to talk about the Four Noble Truths. But this is a way into it. So I switched to the Protestant schools. My father was Protestant, and so he paid Protestant school taxes so I could shift easily. Otherwise, I would have been really stuck. Then I went to the school, and I was really overwhelmed and freaked out. And Mrs. McLagan really took me under her wing. And there's been lots of others. I invite you to think about the people in your life who've taken you in when you really needed it. Because none of us would be here if there weren't those. Funny, I'm not sure why I tell you some of these stories, but I'm going to tell you another one. Mr. Gourlay was the scoutmaster of my scout troop. Scouts, I was a Queen Scout, like an Eagle Scout in the States. The Governor General of Canada gave me my badge. The representative of the Queen, it was big stuff. Mr. Gourlay and another man took us, a bunch of us, 8 or 9, 10, on a canoe trip. We rode the train into the center of Algonquin Park in Ontario. And for 10 days, we did a huge loop. It was really something. Young. And then we went home and continued. And I was in the 10th grade, and his daughter was in the 11th grade. And she was graduating. And he came to my house in his car and asked me if I would invite her to her graduation and graduation dance. And I was young and stupid, and I said, no, I couldn't. I couldn't do it. It would be too shameful or something. She was not a popular girl. Not that I was popular, but. So we do things when we're young out of ignorance, and we've all done things that you've done some things, no doubt, that you regret and you beat yourself up for. And we'll do a forgiveness practice around this, maybe tonight. But as my father said one time, a very tense moment, we do the best we are. And we're always doing the best we are. So, I'm inspired to do this talk today really differently than I usually do. I have wonderful diagrams, and they're good. PowerPoint sort of stuff. But I want to do it this way. This is the first talk the Buddha gave. He woke up, he found his way out. And then he went to his 5 friends who'd been practicing with him until he started eating again. Then they abandoned him. Then he found his way awake. And he went to them. And he said, my friends, I found the way. And then he said something like what I'm going to try to say now. And one by one, they got it. They realized what he was talking about. And it comes in the form of the Four Noble Truths, the Four Ennobling Truths. And they're called noble or ennobling because we become noble as we realize them. We become loving. Because they just cut the roots off our greed, hatred, and ignorance. And they're not far away, these insights, these understandings, they're right here. And I want to go back a little bit and state the problem. Not long ago, you didn't exist. And then you got born. And then you went through somebody training, a lot of somebody training. You learned all kinds of things, feelings you could have and shouldn't have. And you learned your culture. You learned the propaganda of your culture. I watched two little short videos one time. One was Palestinians and Israelis teaching their children to hate each other. And the other one was Northern and Southern Irish people teaching their children to hate each other. We train our children. And we train them out of our own unconsciousness too, just because of who we are. So we go through somebody training and then we become somebody. And the somebody is a mammal who is subject to greed, I want, hatred, I don't want, and ignorance of not paying attention, not knowing what's happening. Unconscious. I had a wonderful little dog for about 17 years. His name was Buddha. He was my best dog ever. He came to work with me, therapy dog. We played in the Dharma Hall 100 times, 150 times, chasing each other. But I tried experimenting with him, that he really loved to chase squirrels. And I'd take him to the back door of PIMC to let him out to pee in the backyard. And he braced. He's like, and I tried several times to say, Buddha, it's really bad karma to chase the squirrel. Because when you catch it, he never did, but I had another dog like him, you'll kill it, right? It's a bad thing to do. It never got through. He never improved. He did on occasion when someone was in the client chair and was really deeply sobbing. He did this maybe 10 times. He got down, it was a little white, long-legged dog, got down off the chair, walked over, put one paw up on the person's lap, and if they said okay, and he was not a lap dog, he would go up, he would lick one tear, and then he would go back to his bed. And the person would just dissolve further. So we're not like him. We have a whole level of cortex, the neocortex, which allows us to be conscious of what's happening. We can learn. There are more synaptic connections in our brains than there are stars in all the galaxies. We are the most complicated thing there is. More connections. And we're capable of being conscious. Right? Through us, the universe has learned to see itself, to be awake. And it's not where we start, though. We start as babies, totally ignorant. We don't even know our toes are ours. We don't have an ego for 2 years. We're just inchoate emotion. Greed, hatred. But then we grow up to be adults. And the brain develops. The brain is actively developing until 25. And beyond that, it still does, but they figured out another whole. That's why the rejecting children sometimes come back around age 25 because they become a little saner. But I don't want to get too far off on that. We have this dilemma, which is that we become really identified with this. We think, you think, I think, most of it, we think, this is who I am. And like the Einstein quote, we develop affection for a few people nearest and dearest to us, and maybe people in our clan. But here's one of my favorite factoids, a little book written by a Canadian guy about the rise of civilizations. For the length of time the human brain has existed, for 99.96% of that time, we lived in small hunting gathering bands of 50 or less. 0.04 began with Mesopotamia. And we were not nice to each other in those hunting and gathering bands. The golden age, if there ever was, is now. Consciousness. But the Buddha was 0.02. And the Buddha, Confucius, Zoroaster, it happened 2,000 years ago. Consciousness broke out. So we have this dilemma that I think this is me, you think that's you, and I'm very focused on getting my needs met and my family's needs met, but not the needs of those other people who dress differently or who are on the land that I want. And so we don't live very peacefully with each other. We get together as a couple, and it's so hard because we're blinded by our greed, hatred, and ignorance. And then along comes the Buddha, who figures out, going back a step, the Buddha encounters, in a colorful way, sickness, old age, decay, and death. He's out in his chariot with his charioteer. The Hindu gods send down first a sick person by the road, and they stop, and he's never seen this before. Right? I don't know. Maybe you've been sick, or maybe you've gone to visit someone in the ICU for the first time. It's like, holy shit, this is real. Or maybe your kid gets sick. Sickness. And somehow or another, his denial got broken. And then there's an old age. My mother had a bad stroke and was in a nursing home for 6 years. Her stroke was a bad stroke. Also, her left arm was dislocated at the time of the stroke, and she had a dislocated arm that she could feel, but she couldn't release for 6 years. And I mean, I would go there. I'd go 4 times a year, and it was so hard to be around real old age. One little side story. One day I stayed for lunch, and they asked me to feed this old, thin, her skin was like parchment. And the only thing she could do was open her mouth if I touched her lip and I'd put food in. And then one of the nurses asked me, "Do you know who this is?" And of course I couldn't. And she said, "This was Canada's prima ballerina. She danced on every stage all over the world, and I'm feeding old age." And then he came across a corpse. I've been around a few corpses now. It's really a useful practice. Never miss a chance to sit with a corpse, especially a loved one. I always, one of the reasons we have, the main reason I think we have pets, is to teach our children to grieve. It's also wonderful that they can pat them and love them and so on, but to then when they die, I always pinch pets. I was like, I want to be damn sure I don't bury a living pet. I pinch people too. It's clearer with people. Anyway, sickness, old age, decay, that becomes clearer to one as one ages, and death. And then the Buddha encountered another heavenly messenger, which was a wandering mendicant, a person who had given up the world and was walking with a bowl. And he was a meditator. He'd full-time decided to find his way home out of suffering. So, we live in incredibly sensitive bodies. That water over there that I can infer, the energy coming off that water that impinges on my ear is less than 1/10 of a match. There's no energy at all, but the sensitivity of this thing. And of course, you get a tiny little thorn in you. You can hardly see it and it hurts. Or you get a little tiny thing in your eye and it hurts like hell. And of course, we get a lot more than that. We have car accidents. And there's all that realm of sickness. And then we're so sensitive to trauma as children, always. And then a person can look a little bit like the person who traumatized us, and we're back in it. It's like it's a protective mechanism. So we enter into relationships and we fall in love, and there's that whole remarkable precursor of what love can be. But then, of course, the honeymoon, it has to end. It always does. And then we have to learn to love that person, and it's damn hard. And then maybe they get sick. Or we want to have a baby and we can't. Or the baby comes and the baby's hurt. My wife and I got pregnant the first time we tried. First time. And then she got German measles at 12 weeks. And her mother had a rubella baby who died, Malcolm, who died at 7 weeks. And we had a whole complicated story of meeting a doctor who could talk to the baby and was going to save the baby and blah. And he said to my wife, "When did you first decide to hurt your baby?" Because he had it's like the book, The Secret, that we cause, with our thoughts, we cause things. And we wound up having a saline abortion at 5 months. So they injected the baby with saline. The baby died, and she gave birth. My son, my first son. That's not uncommon. It's happening right now. All over the world. So, we live in a kind of remarkable denial. My life's going to be great. And it is. I mean, think about the pleasures you've had in your life. Think about the fine dinners, the mountaintops you've stood on, I just had a funny memory. Driving down into the valley with the Tetons in the background with the Eagles, I think. What a moment. I wasn't even stoned. Whoa. And every one of us in this room, we have lived incredibly beautiful things. We've also lived incredibly difficult things. And the reason that we suffer so much is because we really are attached and demand that we have pleasure. We want the positive side, but we don't want the other side. And it's not something we can do with a cognitive choice, but that's how we're wired. And the advertising world knows this completely. And there is no satisfaction of desire. There's no end to desire. Though, how many thousand times have you, and it's thousands for me, have you gotten I want this. And then your mind is focused on, I really want this. And then you go for it and you get it. Maybe it takes years. Maybe you get a degree and And then it turns out, oh, it's good, but it doesn't fill that aching place in me because nothing does. We then had difficulty getting pregnant for 18 months. It was the second time. We really wanted that baby. And when the baby came, it was so exciting. And it still is. They're 43 and 38, and there's babies and grandchildren. But the realization slowly dawns, if we're lucky. None of those experiences does it. Because they all exist in time. They come into being and they go out of being. It's like, finally I got it. And then, ooh, anicca, great truth. So, the causes of suffering: greed, I want it; hatred, I don't want it; and ignorance. And ignorance is a synonym of denial. Right? And we can deny a lot. How long have you been in a marriage ever that you knew within a year you really shouldn't be there, and you were there 20 years? How much did you drink during that time? Right? Because the costs seem too high. I've got to stay here. Or, well, you were in an abusive circumstance and you stayed too long. Maybe you were the abuser and you knew way down inside that you were doing something wrong. Actually, I have a little anecdote from social work school. I went to social work school with, some of you know Doug Pullen and my dear friend Larry for a long time. We graduated in 90. And there was a class, mostly it was women in social work school. And there was a class on abuse. And the teacher asked, who among you could work with mostly abused women? And almost the whole class put up their hand. And how many of you could work with abusers, the men usually? And the 3 men in the room put up their hand. And then there was some discussion, and I stupidly, God, I'm so arrogant, I opined, well, if you don't have compassion for the men, how can you possibly help the women? Because you can help them to a point, but if you can't have compassion for the person who in her unconsciousness is doing such harm, you're missing a major piece of human life. Now, it's not that one can't, of course, but one can be much more effective if you have compassion for beings. Anyway, I probably got in trouble with that here. I'm not saying it's not wrong to abuse people. I'm saying it's really wrong to abuse people. But why do people abuse people? Trauma. Taking sides is of no help. Because everyone's the victim. And everyone's the abuser. And so the Buddha got a glimpse of this. There was lots of war in the Buddha's time. The city of his birth was completely destroyed. 60,000 people, they estimate, by a cousin of his who was tricked. They gave him a not a princess bride, and this is when he was already the Buddha, and he marched his army in and killed everybody in the city in the Buddha's time. And when the Buddha died, there were wars going on, and King Bimbisara's son, King Bimbisara had him in a forest there every rainy season for like 30 years, and Bimbisara's son killed the king and told the Buddha, get out. He was a refugee on the road at the time he died. So, if we stay at the level of this story, it's pretty awful. But there's another level completely, which is we can wake up. we can actually, and the Buddha broke through, we can actually become awake and loving. And we can do it in very adverse circumstances. And some people manage to remain human through the most horrific circumstances. And I'd like to be one of those. I aspire, I will be one of those, I intend. So, some of us are so fortunate that we break out of the trance of seeking superficial happiness. We somehow or another reduce our intoxication of all kinds sufficiently that we begin to see the promises of happiness through consumption are not true. The promises of happiness through destroying the unpleasant are not true, because you can't. And, however, the Buddha came along and said, wait, the way home, the way out of this is through the human mind. And what if right now, what if right now we could turn to each other and see, know, irrefutably, I'm you, you're me, we're not separate. Or beyond that, what if we could simply soften and realize, oh, I am this. There's nothing that I'm not. And this body, with its pleasures and pains and hopes and fears and so on, is a dust mote. It's, in a certain way, it doesn't matter. It's going to die really soon. And the things that I freak out about and I'm not satisfied with this and all that stuff, they're all of mind. They're all the fantasy. But the fantasy is really thick, right? And it's so thick because we live in these trance states, which is the trance of the self. Some months ago, I was walking down the road. I think I told a couple of people this. I was walking down the road. I was here at Breitenbush, and very present. And I was aware. There was awareness of a step happening, and then another step happened. And I wasn't meditating. I was just walking. Another step happened, and then I forgot to do this, and then that, and the whole story occurred, and it was real. And then, before my left foot touched the ground, the story was illuminated as the story, and I paused and I thought, my God, there's the whole of the spiritual journey. We have to wake up from those trances, because that's who we think we are. And we can. And every time your awareness is not yours, every time awareness awakens from a wandering mind, that's it. You know, we don't have to practice for 30 retreats and to start having moments of being the Buddha. It's happening all the time. But we don't know. We don't recognize it. It's been happening since you first started meditating. Before that, actually. There are people, many people, who spontaneously awaken. They never do any spiritual practice at all. They just, suddenly something happens and they realize, oh, right. And their lives change. So, the Four Noble Truths. I probably won't finish this tonight. The Buddha said, there really is dukkha. There really is suffering. It's true. It's in everything. And there's 3 levels of insight into this realization. The first is, what might happen in this talk? That's a weird thought, but it's interesting. It doesn't matter who wins the Super Bowl. It doesn't matter who wins the national basketball tournament. It's completely idle chatter. The whole soccer around the world, people kill each other all the time around soccer games. It's completely madness. These people out on the pitch, as they call it, they're just actors. And they're kicking a ball around and we're making it be important. It's crazy. So the first insight is, maybe it's true. Maybe that talk I heard Robert Beatty give, maybe I could pay attention to that. And then we start meditating and we start paying attention and we discover, there's a lot of dukkha in my life. Impatience. I want to become something. And then as we meditate, it really becomes true. We learn, as Stephen Batchelor put it, we learn to bear, as the Buddha put it, I guess, we learn to bear dukkha as a wagon bears a load. So when you're hurting, instead of going off into I shouldn't be hurting, or why did they do this to me, or whatever, we learn how to just be here. That's why we learn to sit. We learn to sit in difficulty because we want to learn about it. Thanks for listening. I don't know who it is that talks here. It's absolutely not planned. When it emerges, it's what emerges. I've been teaching this same topic for 40 some years, and I didn't understand it at all at the beginning. I don't fully understand it now. The second ennobling truth, once we acknowledge how much of the time there's dissatisfaction. Pause. My wife is very disappointing to me. So were my previous wives. And my wife is a remarkable human being. However, she's got neurotic issues and physical issues. She's judgmental. But that's not the problem. Because she's a good enough person. She's not someone I should get away from. But the problem's me. Because I think I could be happier somewhere else. And sometimes you can. I once left a marriage myself, and finally I got it, and it was a very good thing to do. My first wife left me. But the problem isn't in her. The problem is in my inability to be happy and content with what I have. Because I have a lot. So, second ennobling truth. The Buddha called it tanha. There's dukkha, tanha. And tanha means craving or grasping. And There's 3 kinds of tanha. Everything's counted in Buddhism. I have a joke, actually. You know why it's so tedious and boring to talk to Buddhists? They always talk with a list. There's the 7 enlightenment factors and the 5 of this. But there's 3. And these are really worth knowing. And I'm the 3rd one I'm getting some deeper insight into. The first is I, this, you, am deeply conditioned to want pleasure. As a mammal, it's a prime directive. I want pleasure. I want warmth. I want food. I want sex. Why is sex such a blessing and a curse for us? It's because it's the prime directive. And life wants babies. And there happen to be persons involved. And so people get hurt like crazy because we go insane. Because it's way deeper than cognition and consciousness. It's jeez. I learned something about this. My former wife, partner, and I raised dogs. And I don't know if you've ever been around dogs when they're in mating mode, but it's pretty wild. And the notion that it's male aggression, when you watch dogs, it's pretty clear that she really wants him to perform, damn it. Get to work. So, I want pleasure. I want chocolate. I want warmth. I want a nice vacation, not to get sick. And I don't want discomfort. I don't want bad moods. So therefore I'll inject. Or I don't want someone in my way, so I'll push him out of the way. I don't want desire, aversion. And then the 3rd one that I recently had quite a lot of insight into. I noticed it in the movement. Did any of you feel impatient during the movement? Yeah. I did. Ruth would have taken twice as long. And why was I bored? It was a perfectly good thing. Nothing since then has been more, but I wanted to become something. I wanted to become finished with this. So I want to become married. I want to become at the end of this trip. I want to become. And there I was wanting to become done with this exercise that I'm leading, trying to be like Ruth and become. So there's wanting, not wanting, and becoming. Normally we think I'm suffering. Oh, can you hand me the arrows, please? I'm suffering because I've got a toothache. Or I'm suffering because my knee hurts. Or I'm suffering because they left me. Or I'm suffering so many things. And as we develop our meditation, which is so much more than learning to be attentive to the breath, right? The breath is the weight room. I used to be a downhill skier, really into it. Ski patrol in Switzerland. And if you don't have good quads, you might as well not ski. It's just not worth it. Hurts. But if you got good quads, you can fly if you're capable. And the same is true with mindfulness. If you go to the weight room regularly and do the exercises of developing concentration and mindfulness, you can fly. You can be in the middle of a conflict and remember, oh, look at how the mind is responding to this. You can also look at, wow, there's pain here, but there's also this suffering. It's like, oh, this is so hard. I don't like this. And the Buddha had this analogy, these 2 arrows. First arrow, am I hurting, pain and suffering? Yeah. I get another arrow. Oh God, watch this. I can use chopsticks. What if it were possible? Or what if this? What if this is the pain? What if this is the inevitable toothaches of life? Yeah. And toothaches, much more than toothaches, right? It's loss, birth, sickness, old age, decay, death, having experiences you don't want, not having experiences you do want, being with people you don't want to be with, or not being with the beloved all the time. What if the equation were different and that this actually, the second arrow, is the cause of the suffering, not this? Then what if we could learn how to pull out the second arrow? And then we'd still have all the disappointments, we'd still have the car accidents, the people we love hurt, the wars, we'd still have all of it. But we're no longer saying, I only want, not saying, but experiencing at a visceral level, I only want the pleasure. I don't want the pain. What if we learned how to, oh, thanks. What if we somehow could learn how to realize, oh, the pleasure and the pain are intimately linked. I have a nervous system. I'm going to hurt a lot. And I'm going to be comforted. I'm going to be in pleasure a lot. As I get older, chances are the equation's going to get more. I'm going to be hurting more and more. So that's one of the reasons for practice while you're young, said the Buddha. Practice and develop the capacity, because you're headed into some very powerful testing. And if we don't, Joanna Macy said, wonderful modern teacher. Now she's 94, she's still alive. She said once at a workshop I was at, she kind of pleaded with us, please, 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 do your grief work. Turn toward the pain in your life and in your heart that you deny, because if you don't, you will turn on your loved ones when the pain gets bad. Happens all the time. So, what if we could develop in our meditation the capacity to not just pay attention to what if we developed enough concentration and mindfulness, which is not 6 retreats down the road, it's right here. You can do this here. And you could somehow tease them apart and realize, oh, there's the pain. My knee's hurting, or these memories I'm having are hurting, but the suffering about it appears to be self-created. It's created by this mind saying, I don't like it. And you sit with it and you kind of cook with it and you're hurt with it. And then the realization begins to dawn. It's like, wait, it's not a cognitive process. And you realize, and then there are moments when this stops and the suffering's gone. You already have this experience. You've had it a million times. But to learn how to do it intentionally, because you have the benefit of the neocortex and consciousness. And this is kind of always mind-boggling to me. When you're sitting the first time you're sitting in meditation, the mind wanders off, and we then say, oh, I woke myself up. That's absolutely bullshit. You don't wake yourself up. Consciousness wakes up. Mindfulness is not personal. Mindfulness is the consciousness of the universe. You have no control over it. You can create the conditions, maybe, but it's so hungry to come into the world. A parallel to just a little connection, maybe. In Sufism, they do these chants, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah. God is the love, the lover, and the beloved. And as you do that, you're imagining a coil of white light coming from above, or golden light, comes down, and it comes down, and it comes into the heart, and it opens in the heart, and then it comes out into the world. And it's the same process. Consciousness wants to wake up. It's the living universe. It's God. It's that which we are, because we're not the wandering mind. We are that which is awake. So, the second ennobling truth, there's some steps to it. The first is, it's a strange philosophy Robert's talking about. Maybe it'd be worth investigating. Maybe it would be worth putting in some time every day, right? Meditation isn't just about stress management. It isn't just about learning how to modulate your emotions. It's about waking up. And so then there's a second insight. You start noticing it on retreat, like I noticed becoming when I was doing the meditation. And then it starts developing into a capacity that you have to suffer less and less. I've suffered hardly at all with this lung thing. I think I said there was that one morning when I got caught for about 10 minutes and it was bad. But mostly it's just, well, this is what's happening. And it's not life-threatening, blessedly. And so on. So, I'm going to run just a little bit into dinner, maybe 5 minutes. That's the first noble truth. The second noble truth. I want to go back because I may have left something hanging. I really disapprove and don't think it's wise to stay in a relationship where you're being abused. I also think it's not wise to be abusive. And there are times in relationships where to not leave causes harm to everybody, including, or maybe especially, the abuser. So, I believe you do everything you can because you put a lot of energy, maybe these kids. You do everything you can to make it workable where you're not dying slowly. But then, if you can't do it, this thing we do about I made vows and therefore I'm in this, that's really about raising children and trying to create a stable environment, and also about land transfer and so on. That if one is on the spiritual path, relationships are vehicles for the development of consciousness. And sometimes they end. And when they end, if you want to enter another relationship, you enter at a very different level of differentiation. And you have a different educational experience that one can look at. I do life as an educational experience. My children, of course, they suffered a lot with that. My first wife, I was the stay-at-home parent a lot. My first wife went for sole custody. She wanted to make me a stay-at-home, and we had to fight. We had a custody battle. We had a custody battle that I won. The custody evaluator said one afternoon to her and me, "These children belong with both of you, but if this person said to her, if you insist on pushing this and go to court, I'm giving sole custody to Robert." All of a sudden, her attorney came back and said, "Well, this has been a hard week for her, and she'd like to offer joint custody." And it was hard, the joint custody. She's still a very, very difficult person. But anyway. One wakes up sufficiently and you become so curious about your meditation. It's not, I need to go meditate now. It's, what the hell's going on in here? I want to see what's going on in here. And it's not just on your cushion. You're driving your car and you're so curious, what's happening here? And then you start having these experiences where the suffering stops. Maybe suddenly, sometimes. Or you just start feeling better. And then there's the third ennobling truth, which the Buddha called nirvana or nibbana. Nirvana isn't another planet. It's not ta-da! Big experience. I've attained nirvana. Anyone who says I'm enlightened doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. Because there aren't enlightened people, there's enlightened moments. Jack Cornfield. So, nirvana is an image I love. Imagine it's a dark room. I've got a wooden handle, and there's a half-inch wrought iron poker or pole, and on the top there's 2 inches of white hot iron. White hot. And in front of me there's a bowl. You can see the light just around the rim. I tried to find a blacksmith who would do this, but I never found anybody. And so there's nice music. No, it's silent. And the poker starts going down, and this white hot ball starts moving toward the cold black water. And the camera zooms in on it, and it gets really quite close. And as the ball gets about an inch from the water starts to dance. And then it gets closer, and the water really starts to dance. And then it hits the water, and all hell breaks loose. And the light goes from white to yellow to red to black. That's nirvana. It's the quenching of the fire of wanting things to be different. And what it means is, oh, this is happening and I'm having a reaction. Let me study this reaction and, all right, this is what's happening. And it's really painful. Or this is what's not happening. I really want this positive thing to be happening, and it's not going to happen. Oh, well. And it's not resignation, it's awakening. And this is not some other... There's one thing that really keeps people stuck. They think, well, I'll only get this when I've meditated for 25 or 30 years. That's not true. You can get this today. Small little bites. And it builds on itself. And then there's 3 insights to the nirvanic experience, non-experience. And they are, that's an interesting theory. Wonder if it's true. Cognitive. And then you start practicing, and you start noticing, wow, I used to find this person doing that, or this reality in my life unbearable. And now it's not such a big deal. Or now I don't care anymore. I've accepted that I have this disability, or I've accepted that I have I've accepted that I have this child who is rejecting me. There's a whole thing, it's actually a big deal around the country now, of middle-aged children, often when they have children, discovering that their parents were bad parents. And often making up whole stories about it, supported by therapists often. And sometimes it'll go on for a year or 2 or 3, and then they wake up and realize, oh shit, that was a fantasy. My parents were inadequate, but they weren't that. But we fall into these traps. And there's lawsuits, lots of lawsuits of grandparents who are suing parents for access to their grandchildren. Maybe they helped raise the grandchildren to age 3, and then the parents discovered, I was abused by this person, and maybe they were. And sometimes I've worked so many times with people, not just in that circumstance, but life has gone on this weird tangent. And that's how it is. And here's a common one. You finally meet the person of your dreams. And they're really good partner. And you work on your relationship, and it's really good. And then they die. What do? One possibility is to spend the rest of your life unhappy. It wasn't fair. Or I can never live again. Another possibility is to really grieve fully, and then have your whole consciousness transformed into a person who knows about death. and who can be present around other people who've had similar losses and can be loving. And then you discover that not only did you have that precious other, but they helped you learn how to open your heart, and they gave you in death the greatest gift they gave you in their lifetime, which was they helped you realize anicca, impermanence. The same is true with loss of children. Right? It can take years, but it doesn't take a lifetime to become, doesn't mean the sadness goes away, but we learn somehow how normal it is. How normal it is to have these monstrous, tragic losses. And then, if we're wise and fortunate and supported, we turn those losses into love and compassion. We grow up. And that doesn't happen by accident. And the teachings of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the meditation are really the royal road. They're the freeway, in a way. Learning how to, let's say you're really grieving. To get enough support, and it takes a lot, but to be able to actually, maybe it's got a hand, you're holding a hand, and to go into that anguish of that loss. That normally you go toward it and you bounce off. It's like, oh, I can't think of it. And maybe you go back to drinking or drugs or something. Or maybe you work a lot. Maybe you find another relationship and don't think about that anymore. But at some point, if we're so lucky and we develop the capacity to turn toward, and then we recognize the awesome horror of it, and we discover that, what am I in that horror? I am that which is aware of it. I'm not the horror. And then we have moments of freedom. And those are skills which are developable. So it's not an accident. You know, you've met people who are really luminous and they've been through a lot. I often say, actually, I meet someone and they're really there and present, and I sometimes I'll say, well, you've been through a lot of shit. Because they're somehow open at a depth that you don't get to open without there being dukkha and its realization. So to close, this can all seem monumental, right? Between here and the kitchen, or the dining room, you're going to be walking. You're going to push the door open. Did you fix the squeak?
No, it was...
Somebody put in a request.
Yeah.
I think it's squeaking way less.
Someone with W40 working.
Oh, that's okay.
Oh,
Great.
it's not going to last long then.
I wasn't finding it suffering, but I found it, well, it was a little irritating. It's like this squeaking. We don't have to have that. Anyway, between here and dinner, you have no idea if you're going to wake up. When you put your first bite of dinner in your mouth, you could suddenly not have some big ba-da, but you could realize, I'm tasting this, and it tastes good, and I'm right here. That's the path. It's mindfulness in every moment. And not mindfulness, but just really setting your course. I want to be in the present moment. I am in the present moment. And then the awakening is inexorable. You can't stop that. Okay. Well, thank you, my friends. It's beautiful, isn't it? Dharma is so exquisite. So, in a way which is not stiff or stilted at all. Let's finish, I'll ring the gong. Let's finish and make our way up to dinner. As though we were really on vacation. Right? We are on vacation. You don't even have to talk to each other. You don't have to check your email. We're on vacation and there's no hurry, but gosh, it's great to be alive. Okay. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's a nice spell. Liking.
This has been a Dharma talk offered by Robert Beatty, guiding teacher of PIMC, the Portland, Oregon Insight Meditation Community. For more information, you may go to www.robertbeatty.com. That's www.robertbeatty.com.